Hello, good day to everyone watching us live through Zoom and Facebook. And welcome to the third edition of SCMAP Live. I'm Karlo Nograles, the President-elect of SCMAP, your host for this afternoon. SCMAP Live is our series of free online events where we explore what the new normal means for us in supply chain and how we can best take advantage. In the last 3 months, we have explored ensuring health in the workplace, the new boom in e-commerce, and just last week, new transportation. But today, in this special edition of SCMAP Live, we are honored to have with us key government officials who are leading the Philippines' response to COVID-19. This is your opportunity to hear directly from them what our government's next steps are as we enter 6 months from the first lockdown, and as we continue to grapple with the disease impact on our lives and the country's economy. But before all of that, here to welcome you to this event is the President of the Supply Chain Management Association of the Philippines and the Supply Chain Director of Robinson Supermarket Corporation, Ms. Christine Pardiñas.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're here again for the third series of our SCMAP Live. Let me just share my slides for today. Yes, so we won't start without us sharing with you some of the programs that we have in SCMAP. Today is a very special edition because we have very special guests. These are distinguished guests from the government. Last week in our edition on transport, we shared with you how we keep on preparing to adapt to the new normal. But for today, it's time to start to adapt to the new normal in supply chain. So what have we done so far and how we can work hand in hand with the government in order to further the supply chain industry. That is to increase the capacity and to improve the capability of our own people. So we have been sharing with you our pillars in supply chain, the advocacy, communication, education, and how we work with the different associations, government agencies, other organizations, and stakeholders in the industry. When we say advocacy, it's about policy reforms on how to improve the supply chain competitiveness. Communication is how to continuously share new ideas, trends, and best practices for a stronger supply chain community. And of course, education is about pursuing the relevance of supply chain in nation building through further education. But what is SCMAP? SCMAP is Supply Chain Management Association of the Philippines, the premier supply chain organization bringing together stakeholders in the public and private sectors to move the global competitiveness of Philippine supply chain. These are our different committees that help us in our advocacies and how to communicate, continuously coordinate with our members. Starting this month, we are adopting a new framework. So we call it Restart, Rethink, Reconnect. Restart is to show us the resilience of the Philippine industry, the Filipinos, on how to rise up against all the challenges that come our way. Rethink is how to come up with the new strategies to rethink how we do our businesses in order to continuously develop the industry. And of course, Reconnect is on focusing on what's important and essential for our businesses. We have been bringing you several programs since June. So we started with no other than Honorable CABSEC Karlo Nograles last June, but that was with a program that we did together with the SCAN Networks Hub e-Forum, where we launched the SCAN Dashboard and Incident Reporter app. I hope that all of you are using this app to report any incidents related to logistics or supply chain. And of course, in June also, we did our forum on safety and health and safety in the workplace. And of course, in July, it's all about e-commerce. So everything that is relevant, all the topics that we need in order for us to adapt in the new normal. Last week, I shared with everyone that it's the first part of a two-week series. So last week we discussed on how to navigate the new transport landscape, wherein our special guests discussed different options on how to deal with our transport challenges. Shall we do air freight? Shall we do sea freight? And we promised you that this week, our guest from the government will continue to answer all the questions that we weren't able to tackle last week. But let me share with you again some of our programs in the coming months. So starting September 2020, we are resurrecting our supply chain mornings. True to our commitment to further the supply chain competitiveness, we will be giving you workshops. It will be very interactive. It will be very collaborative on as far as issues and problems in supply chain are concerned. And then from 2021, we are all in the preparation for our series of short online seminars. So I hope this will keep you excited to watch out for all our programs, program offerings in the coming months. But of course, let's not forget, in October, we will be having our supply chain conference live because we cannot go to our usual place in EDSA Shangri-La. It will be a three-part series. As I mentioned earlier, it will be patterned after the framework Restart, Rethink, and Reconnect. For any details, just go to scmap.org for more information. So for today, what is so important about today's session? I know all of you have all these questions in mind. How many cases are there as of today? These are just numbers that I gathered from the different source of information that we have been monitoring day by day in order to guide us in our everyday businesses. We heard about the Philippine economy shrinking. We hear about concerns from our member companies about rapid tests being required in some LGUs. Is this really required? Is this effective? Manufacturing or industrial production declined by 22.9%. We hear about government supporting all those that are displaced in the workplace. So for today, all these questions I hope will be answered by our guest speakers, who are none other than Cabinet Secretary Karlo Nograles from the IATF on Emerging Infectious Diseases, Dr. Beverly Lorraine Ho, on behalf of Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergara, who cannot be with us today, Honorable Benjamin Magalong, and of course, last but not the least, Secretary Karl Chua from NEDA. So as not to keep you waiting, so I'll turn the floor back to Karlo. Thank you, Karlo, for holding the part for us this afternoon. And of course, thank you also for to the BOD and the SCMAP Secretariat for making this special event possible. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's all keep supply chain moving. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine. That's a very insightful message, and we're very excited to learn today. But before we proceed, we would like to remind our participants via Zoom that you can raise your questions throughout the afternoon by using the Q&A function on your Zoom app. We will have an open forum after all of our speakers have presented. If you want to ask your questions through audio or video, you may raise your hand through that, and we will get in touch as soon as we can. If you're watching on Facebook, you can post your questions as a comment on the live stream. And thank you as well for taking part in the special edition of SCMAP Live. As we mentioned earlier, today we'll be hearing from key government officials who are leading the country's fight against COVID-19. Later, we will hear perspectives from public health, safety and economy. But first, we'll hear from the co-chair of the Interagency Task Force for the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases, or what we all know as the IATF. Karlo Nograles was appointed as Cabinet Secretary by President Rodrigo Duterte in 2018. In this capacity, he was named as co-chair of the IATF as it was convened to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. He was previously representative for the 1st District of Davao City from 2010 to 2018, where he chaired the House Committee on Appropriations and authored legislation boosting jobs, the agriculture sector, and public safety. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to present co-chair of the IATF, Cabinet Secretary Karlo Nograles. Hello, sir. Hi, Kapsi.
Thank you very much, Pierre Karlo. There are a lot of Carlos in the room. Pierre Karlo, myself, and Secretary Karl Chua. So sa aking mga tokayo at sa lahat ng mga Karlo pa na nanonood at nakikinig ngayon, magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Of course, I'd like to greet and say hello to our SCMAP President, Christine Pardiñas, at yung mga kabalikat ko sa serbisyo, Secretary Karl Chua, the Honorable Benji Magalong, Dr. Beverly Ho, at lahat ng mga bumubuo ng SCMAP. Before I start my talk, allow me to express our deepest gratitude to all the members and affiliates of the Supply Chain Management Association of the Philippines for continued endeavors to ensure that essential goods are available for every Filipino and their families, especially during these pandemic times. Your support is greatly appreciated in our journey to heal and recover as one. Next slide. In the last 7 months, we've actually seen the economic impact of COVID-19 on emerging market economies, which actually far exceeds that of any global financial crisis that we've seen in our lifetime. And the COVID-19 crisis still remains to be unfolding, speak, and you compound that with our other challenges, social issues that hinder growth like poverty, inequality, and unemployment, all of which were being addressed in earnest before this pandemic struck. And now it's coupled with global financial stressors, such as dislocations in the global trade and supply chains, reduction in foreign direct investments, which has made it even more challenging for us and for many countries around the world. Nonetheless, in the Philippines, due to the foundations laid prior to the pandemic, such as our strong fiscal and monetary policies, it has allowed us and gives us more hope, no, for the future, na kaya natin bumangon ng mas madali. Our economy, truth be told, has very significant growth in the last 20 years, an average annual growth between 2001 and 2009 at about 4.6%. Then between 2010 to 2019, it grew to an average of 6.4%. So with so much consecutive quarters and years of growth, we've actually moved our country from a lower middle income nation with a gross national income per capita of 39,639 in 2018 to upper middle income country with a gross national income per capita of 41,595 in 2019. Our poverty rate has declined as well, with real wages increasing. Poverty has decreased from 23.0% in 2015 to 16.6% in 2018. Then the pandemic struck. So right now, what we're trying to do is focus a lot of our attention to battling this pandemic. But to focus properly on mitigating the effects of the pandemic, the government needed to strategize and provide mechanisms in one, the sectoral level, and two, industry level. So first, on the sectoral level. Next slide. On the sectoral aspect, we all know that the Bayanihan to Heal as Act was enacted on March 26, which gave the president the authority and the power necessary to battle COVID-19 head-on. It provided key measures focusing on three main priorities. Number one, providing emergency assistance to all affected sectors. Number two, securing the necessary facilities and resources for the health sector. And number three, performing fiscal and monetary actions to help the economy. Now we are on our Bayanihan 2. So from Bayanihan 1, we are now moving towards the passage of Bayanihan 2, which still leans on the premise of response and recovery interventions, but with more coverage and more funding. Entitled the Bayanihan to Recover as One Act, Bayanihan 2 has been submitted for the President's signature after the House of Representatives and the Senate ratified the Bicameral Conference Committee report. Under Bayanihan 2, we will now have a stimulus package worth 165.5 billion pesos, 140 billion in regular appropriation, and 25.5 billion as standby funds. These funds will be used, actually the biggest share will be used for soft loans to take care of the badly hit sectors, such as the micro, small, and medium enterprises, particularly under the transport, tourism, and agriculture sectors. It also seeks to provide loan assistance, subsidies, grants to schools, universities, colleges, tech-voc institutions, to teachers and students, particularly those who need to purchase distance learning tools, computers, and other devices. Provide continued assistance to Filipino businessmen, especially the small businessmen and workers impacted by the pandemic. Kasama na dyan ang ating mga overseas Filipino workers who were either repatriated or whose deployments were suspended. It will provide faster, simplified loan processing. Requirements will be simpler also, and it will be extended to even home loan borrowers. It allots 13.5 billion for health-related responses, including the retroactive payment of 100,000 pesos hazard duty pay for health workers effective February of 2020. Continuous employment of our existing emergency health workers program, augmentation of the operations of Department of Health hospitals, and risk allowance to both public and private health workers. 3 billion pesos will be allotted for the procurement of face masks, face shields, and other personal protective equipments. 0.5 billion for the construction of temporary medical isolation and quarantine facilities. Bayanihan 2 is actually a positive development for our country as it complements new legislations that were passed, particularly for tech companies, like, for example, Republic Act 1193, the Philippine Innovation Act, and Republic Act 1137 something, Innovative Startup Act, focusing on giving incentives to startups and MSMEs as drivers of growth in the digital economy. Regulatory relief is also being considered for the creative sector by tasking DTI and DILG to review the amusement tax that is being imposed, no? So i-review din yan kung anong pwedeng gawin sa imposition ng amusement tax during these pandemic times. Next slide. On industry aspect. As you know, the IATF, we have sort of delegated or just to handle this pandemic more efficiently, created different task groups and technical working groups so that everybody work together, no, and more efficiently. So we've dichotomized the needed responses to mitigate impacts and pursue recovery from the pandemic, with all the different task groups and technical working groups working together. In the end, these task groups and technical working groups forward to the big IATF the proposed resolutions to battle the pandemic. I'll just go through some of the resolutions very quickly. Next slide. So resolution number 21 deals with unhampered movement and activities to boost domestic agricultural production and food processing, and additional support for the plant program. Resolution number 25 establishes the task group on food security with the Department of Agriculture as chair. Resolution number 33 adopted the food security framework and food safety guidelines for the agriculture and fishery sector. You can move the slides as I go along the different resolutions so we can quickly lang. And this creation of a subtask group for supply chain analytics. Resolution number 40 and 41, which deals with the resumption of activities and businesses, provided that the operations of such would maintain minimum health standards, omnibus guidelines that underlines and underscores the unhampered movement of supply and usage of relevant logistical measures to ensure continuity of essential goods and services and operations of business establishments to maintain economic activities. Resolution number 45, adopt the DTI's recommendation to gradual reopening of dine-in food. And resolution number 46, the Department of Transportation adopting recommendation to allocate a percentage of cargo space every voyage exclusively to food products. So these are just some of the resolutions that we've passed. And these all stemmed from the recommendations made by our different technical groups and technical working groups and technical working groups. Now on to the supply chain analytics network. Next slide. Next slide. Since the launch of the Supply Chain Analytics Dashboard and Reporter app last May 21, the Supply Chain Analytics Network Hub has been conducting several forums to properly discuss the necessary mechanisms the supply chain and logistics industry needs to move forward in this pandemic. In its most recent e-forum, the network has provided discussions on road infrastructure development in support of the industry. So in these discussions was underscored the importance of road infrastructure and other infrastructure development in the unhampered supply chain and logistics continuum, especially in times of disasters and in this COVID-19 pandemic. The presentations revolved primarily on infrastructure support for supply chain and logistics and the importance it plays in catalyzing economic growth. Hence, the commitment of the Department of Public Works and Highways, the chair of the Infrastructure Cabinet Cluster, along with the Department of Transportation to provide the necessary infrastructure development within their mandates to benefit the supply chain and logistics industry and result in the industry's economic growth and countries as well. Next slide. So this commitment primarily revolves around our Build, Build, Build program for the continued construction of needed infrastructure. Now, these projects are obviously aimed to be responsive to the country's current needs and, more importantly, our post-pandemic needs. So various infrastructure projects were actually completed amidst this pandemic that we're facing. I'd like to make special mention of the Angat Water Transmission Improvement Project, which will provide more water to Metro Manila, and the Tarlac-Pangasinan-La Union Expressway Rosario exit that will cut travel time between Manila and Baguio City to 3 hours from the usual 6 to 7 hours. This will obviously also facilitate better flow of cargo and necessities needed between provinces. This program considers the supply chain and logistics industry as both partner and at the same time stakeholder in providing the necessary services in the attainment of our objectives and at the same time benefiting the infrastructure development to ensure our country's and the industry's recovery. This mindset of supply chain and logistics and government partnership is seen to help the government strategy to reduce travel time, improve road quality and safety, and connectivity, most importantly, the protection of lives and properties from natural disasters and pandemics. Next slide. However, to fully take off and lessen the direct and indirect effects to the industry and the country, there should be a necessary goal to reach on, lessening the overall impact of the pandemic and creating an environment of sustainability and resiliency for the supply chain and logistics industry. And that is through food security. Next slide. Now, if we go by the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World 2020 report, which presents the most recent and authoritative estimates on the extent of hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition around the world, it said in that report that in many parts of the world, local markets brace for the looming impacts of COVID-19 amid uncertainties related to demand, logistics, and even access to food. Next slide. So on the supply side, while COVID-19 may not necessarily create food shortages as the production of major food crops is expected to remain above average, but we all understand that this pandemic has created disruptions along the food supply chain. Limited labor mobility in areas dependent on seasonal migrant labor and made it difficult to access markets and transport food within and across countries. Further disruptions may also be experienced even in the planting seasons across the globe. On the demand side, lockdowns have actually hampered people's ability to access food and this has created serious economic downturns. Namely, difficult not only to access but to afford food, particularly for poor and vulnerable communities and families. Low and middle income countries will most likely be affected. So all of this might even create pockets of food insecurity, even in countries that had low levels of food insecurity to begin with. So just as a lookout, the next battle after the pandemic, and even right now, as we are battling the pandemic, would be the problem of food insecurity. So in the Philippines, in our case, what we have done thus far, the IATF created a task on food security. And we've actually approved a food security framework that lays out the supply chain and logistics industry as a vital role in its vision to survive, reboot, grow a socio-economic recovery and resiliency plan. And its pillars are anchored on number 1, production and availability. Number 2, accessibility and affordability. Number 3, price stability. And number 4, food safety. The food security framework strategies include farm consolidation, modernization, industrialization, export promotion, and infrastructure development, in which resources from government coupled with the supply chain and logistics industry can provide high returns and at the same time help our country achieve food security. So in other words, your industry plays an integral role in the continued movement of necessary supplies and use of logistics for us to attain food security. In the same manner, next slide, your industry also plays a crucial role in the initiatives that we have laid out under our Interagency Task Force on Zero Hunger, which I chair, particularly to provide support for these key result areas, as you can see. These key result areas will actually all part of our national food policy that we will be launching on October in celebration of World Food Day. So we're currently drafting the national food policy, which will be our roadmap and blueprint towards achieving zero hunger by year 2030, and the components of which are found in these key result areas. I'd like to make special mention of key result area number 3, which is securing nutrition adequacy. This KRA focuses on food utilization essential to gaining nutrition. So to operationalize this, the adoption of technologies like food fortification will be the new norm in order to provide nutritious food to beneficiaries. In this aspect, the industry provide underlying support in ensuring supply and logistics to be readily available to food technology adopters and for our regular government feed programs. Another area of collaboration would be KRA 4, which is securing food accessibility and food safety. So what we aim to do, or what we seek to do, is map out an entire value chain across primary, secondary, and tertiary industries to determine where are the critical and alternative resources, where they can be sourced, the identification of possible production bottlenecks, and perhaps even facilitate the reinvention, if necessary, the reinvention of our food logistics ecosystem and explore new models and innovation in the food value chain. Next slide. These strategies are achieved through our demand supply planning and optimization system, or Project Deploy. And so these strategies will be achieved through our demand supply planning and optimization system, or Project Deploy, and our Deliver E project under Department of Trade and Industry. These projects are also opportunities for you in the industry to capitalize on demand in the demand supply chain of essential goods and the innovation in the agriculture and e-commerce platforms. So to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, all of these things that I've mentioned are just some of the many programs being embarked on and deployed by government. Know that government is committed in its continued support for the supply chain and logistics industry. We will be implementing government programs, but everything that we'll do would be a challenge without your support, whether in terms of construction, manufacturing, transportation, and storage, whether it's information and communications and other strategies. It will always be the economic chain that binds our country's journey to economic prosperity. The supply chain and logistics industry will always be part of that economic chain that binds our country's journey to economic prosperity, COVID or no COVID. Know that you are our partners in our battle, and know that you have a very crucial role that would provide connectivity in the implementation and sustainability of all our programs. With this, I now invite you all to listen to my fellow government workers in their presentations and discussions so that we can all learn together how to synergize further our continuing efforts to heal and recover as one. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Kabsec. That is very insightful, and we're very hopeful now for the future. I'm sure we will be able to bounce back very well as a country. Once again, if you have any questions, you can enter them through the Q&A function in your Zoom app. We will get to them at the open forum later in the event. So our next speaker represents the Department of Health, Dr. Beverly Lorraine Ho, is a director for the Health Promotion Bureau and also special assistant to the Secretary for Universal Health Coverage for the DOH. She previously led the research division of the agency's Health Policy Development and Planning Bureau and was instrumental in efforts to the passage of legislation such as taxes on sugar sweetened beverages and tobacco products, as well as universal health care. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Beverly Ho.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you po. Thank you, Capsec and Mayor Magalong and Sec Carl and the officials and members of SCMAP po. So thank you for this opportunity on behalf of the Department of Health. I'll just share my screen. All right. So based on the request po, the two key topics that I'll be discussing today are with regard to testing and data. But before that, I think it's also important to just go through very quickly the basics of transmission, because this is what many people are always anxious about, afraid of. And I guess the entire response will not be as effective if all of us will actually feel very helpless about the entire situation. No? So what do we actually know about how COVID-19 spreads so that we also know how to protect ourselves? No? At this point in time, what we know is that it is zoonotic in nature. No, it came from animals, but the specific originating animal is still uncertain up to this point, right? But in terms of transmission, human-to-human transmission, we are sure of three pathways, no? Direct contact, indirect contact, through fomites, no? Kaya tayo lagi pinapaghugas ng kamay, and then through droplets. That's when we speak, yell, sing, etc. No? Or when we just talk with someone who's in close proximity with us. What is uncertain, and I'm talking about solid literature on this, it's still uncertain that there's airborne transmission. But what you see oftentimes in many articles is that COVID-19 could be aerosolized. No? Airborne is not the same as aerosolization. No? So aerosolization just means that the droplets become smaller and smaller, that they can be suspended in air for longer periods of time. No? So different siya sa airborne, where it's actually really just floating for a longer period of time. No? So I'm not discounting it. We're not discounting it, but obviously our official position will always be based on available evidence. And what we've seen now is a lot of speculation, no? Even amongst the scientific community. So what we're also sure about is that it's not transmitted by fecal-oral route. And why are we saying this? Because we see some people doing UV on their food, etc. No? So we just need to start stepping back a little bit and see ano ba talaga yung kailangan gawin natin versus hindi. All right. How does the droplet look like? Why are we talking about at least 1 meter or 3 feet? It's because we know that it's large infectious droplets. No, so COVID-19 is transmitted through infectious droplets, which will require us to be at least 3 feet away or 1 feet. Next, so just to show you finally this epidemiologic triad, wherein we emphasize why we do what we need to do. No? So there are 3 things that cause a fire, no, or an epidemic to grow badly. So it's the agent, the type of virus that we have, that's COVID-19, the type of environment that we have, and the host, no, which would be you and me. No? And how well we are able to respond to the virus, that's partly our genetic susceptibility, that's partly how healthy we are, our nutritional status, and also our motivation to keep performing the masking, the distancing, hand washing, right? So that's us. That's modified. Some are modifiable, but some we actually live with it. Then there's your environment, no? How sanitized your environment would be. Is someone doing frequent disinfection, for example? Yung air conditioning system, the ventilation system, how well it is. The social context, if someone actually lives in a place where there's actually no water access, for example. And then availability of healthcare. And then finally, the agent, no? So it's virulence and infectivity. And this is what you often hear in the news, diba? With the new mutations in the virus, we know that it's more infectious, mas nakakahawa, but doesn't mean that it's more virulent or mas nakakamatay, no? So at least we know that. So for the agent, we can't do anything about it. They really mutate, no? So that's something that we can't modify. But the bottom two items, environment and host, we can modify. And I think this is what we need to keep on emphasizing to everyone, no? Because we can modify our resiliency, we can be healthier, we should eat better, we should be constantly motivated to perform all the safety protocols, then we can do it. And then in terms of environment, this is something that we can also do. Your companies have adopted several of the engineering controls and administrative controls. So that's part of it. No? So ang gusto lang natin sabihin dito, hindi out of control yung triangle natin, no? Because we can modify environment and the host. All right, so just on the general preventive measure, I won't go through the first 3 points, but then the last 3 points are quite important. No? If you have symptoms, seek medical care early, preferably through telemedicine. There are many telemedicine providers now, and stay at home or keep isolated if you feel unwell. So isolate if in doubt. No? Whether you get tested or not, the first thing to do is to make sure that you're able to isolate. And finally, adequate ventilation. Earlier in the pandemic, we haven't emphasized this point a lot, but ngayon po, most of the studies are really showing how this is important. So if we stay in our homes and there's an opportunity to be outdoors, even within the confines of our homes, then that's actually the preferred route. All right, so let's now go to testing. So very simply, no, many new technologies have come up in the last 6 months of this pandemic. And so people are a bit confused which tests to use, how to interpret them. So the next few slides will just show in very simple table how you'd want to actually use the test. No? But in very simple form, ito lang po siya. So first, if you want to know whether you are currently infected, then you need to do the PCR test, which is the confirmatory test, right? But then a new kid is on the block, which is the antigen test. It will also tell you that you are infected. But what will tell you that you have already been infected in the past, meaning tapos na siya, no? So you're done with it. It would be the antibody test, for which there are 3 types of antibody tests now, which are on the market, and they all have very different sensitivity and specificity. So I put the greater than sign to say sino yung pinaka-superior, no, based on literature. And that would be your ECLIA, then the ELISA, before you go to the rapid antibody test. The RATs would be the one you use, similar to parang the pregnancy test, diba? Then if you also want to know how much of a certain population is infected, like in your office, if you have 10,000 people, then you will randomly sample ilang percent kaya yung meron, no? So you also use antibody test. Then how will you know if someone has recovered from the infection? No test is needed. No? In the past, we would call for 2 negative PCRs, and then we changed it to 1 negative PCR. And then most recently, last end of May, WHO, Singapore, CDC came out with their studies showing that you actually don't need it. No? Bakit? Why don't you need another test to say you're recovered? Because what they're showing is that the PCR is so sensitive, it's really good, that it detects both a live virus and the viral fragments. So kung patay na siya, no? So it detects both the live chicken, no, and the chicken bones. So it doesn't differentiate. No? So what other scientists have done is also to start culturing, no? So, kapag kinulture, ibig sabihin pwede pang mabuhay, di ba? So, kunan ka ng swab, they culture it. If it's live virus, then you can actually be infectious, di ba? But if they swab from you and then they try to grow it on a plate, on a petri dish, and then it doesn't grow anymore, it's dead na, it's just fragments, then it means you're not infectious, no? So ito na ngayon yung parang maging critical. And in the next few weeks, we may probably know a little bit more about how to use it better. But for now, the knowledge and the science tells us that to know whether you're done with COVID or not, you've recovered or not, you actually don't need to be tested. By day 11 of your illness, you're actually already non-infectious. Okay? And then, what test do you use when you want to screen return to work employees? It's what medical societies call the 14-day test. No need for any diagnostics. It will just need the clinical eye of your medical practitioner. No? So, quite busy, but we'll share the slides anyway. I'll just run through the entire thing with all of you. We put everything here para mas mabilis din maintindihan. No? So when we talk about determining the current infection, we are talking about two tests, no? PCR and antigen. And by the way, we call it the right test, no? Kasi it's unfair to say, okay, this test is not superior for this, no? But it's actually, there are certain tests that are better for certain indications. So at this point in time, a lot of people in the past thought that the antibody test could be used to determine whether someone is infectious or not. No? Sir Karlo or Sir Nico actually said, a lot of you are asking, kailangan ba ikaw i-antibody test for you to go to a certain province when you're delivering certain goods, di ba? What is the goal? If the goal of the test is to know whether nagka-COVID ka na before, then by all means, right? But if they're testing you because they wanted to know whether you're going to infect someone in that area, then it doesn't answer that question. So let's go back to the first two lines. So both are swab tests, and the PCR is already the confirmatory. But the antigen test, at this point in time, pending validation, it is going to still be a complementary test. No? So you'll see that the peak sensitivity, no, of PCR test is at 80% at symptom onset or 5 to 7 days after exposure. It means that if I get exposed to a confirmed case, for example, and then I immediately have myself tested by RT-PCR, it might result to a negative test, no? So importante din to know kailan yung timing. And that's why, while waiting for yourself to be tested, what do? Isolate, right? So if you're positive, you're a confirmed case. If you're negative, cleared of COVID-19. This is assuming you tested at the right time, no? But if you did not test at the right time, you might test negative, but you actually harbor it, no? So ito yung parang nuances. That's why it's not for anyone to just interpret whatever it does. Then you have the antigen test, which is just new in the market, a new kid on the block. You test 1 to 5 days after onset of symptoms. And then its peak sensitivity is around 65%. RITM is validating certain brands, and some might actually be much higher than 65, no? Merong aabot ng 80%. So we'll just wait for their official results to come out. So negative, fear of COVID, if you're positive, you need to do a confirmatory. So at least if negative ka dito, you don't have it. In terms of determining past infection or prevalence among a group of people, we use antibody tests. And here is why we recommend ELISA or ECLIA. No? So the test looks for antibody, which you have against the virus, against COVID-19. And the reason why it's very difficult to use just any test for this, just any antibody test, is because you have cross-reaction po, no, with all other coronaviruses, all other respiratory viruses which you have. So pwede kang positive dito, then you're super happy. Okay, I feel like I'm immune already. But really, you are not, no? Because you might have just tested positive for a RAT, an RAT, no? Not an ELISA, not an ECLIA, for a rapid antibody test. but actually you are positive because you had other coronaviruses. No? So not necessarily COVID. So yung preferred sa antibody test would be your ELISA or ECLIA. So positive serology test means past or recent infection. So if you're negative, it could mean a lot of things. No past infection, had infection, but immune response not strong enough to make the antibodies so that it will be visible dun sa test. Then in terms of determining recovery, I've said it's no more tests needed. And if screening, also you just do symptom check. So this is what it is, yung 14-day test. We don't recommend, the DOLE, the DTI, we don't recommend any testing for return to work. It's really just 14-day COVID-19 symptom-based testing. So you just ask, or your medical doctor within the company or your medical team will just ask your employees about symptoms in the last 14 days. Yep, so these are our scientific community, local scientific communities review also of evidence. So I already talked about this po kanina, the recovery criteria. So when are you considered recovered? So for someone who has been symptomatic during the course, as long as you're clinically recovered based on the evaluation of your doctor, you're asymptomatic for 3 days, and you've completed the 14-day self-isolation at home, in a temporary treatment monitoring facility, or in a hospital. If you're asymptomatic, you're clinically recovered, you have remained asymptomatic for the 14 days, and you've completed the quarantine. So kita nyo po dito, we call it self-isolation. Here, we call it self-quarantine. Quarantine is typically for people without symptoms, and isolation is for people with symptoms. So before I move on to the last part, which is on data, we just wanted also to emphasize, because people now keep asking, do I call the DOH for my results? Do I call the DOH for contact tracing, etc.? At the end of the day, in the COVID-19 pathway, your best friend has to be your barangay health emergency response team, your BERT or BHERT. So wherever you live, please make sure you know your barangay captain and you know who your barangay health emergency response. They're your go-to, and they're supposed to navigate the entire system for you. So that's really the only number or the person that you need to know. So we have a campaign that's called Bida Solution sa COVID-19, a wordplay on what the IDA is, so what you need to do, the preventive behavior, but more importantly, here, we're emphasizing that each one of us can actually be part of the solution. So apart from just that traditional communication campaign, we have also been going down to barangays to get insights from household members, etc., why they're actually unable to abide by the preventive protocol. So yeah. Finally, a lot of people ask about the data challenges. So in the past 6 months, several things have happened about the COVID-19 data. But for many of you this is the first time that you've looked at DOH data for certain diseases, for example, or maybe you will be frustrated. But at the same time, in the last 6 months, we've actually made strides. Bakit? These were things that never happened in the past. So real-time reporting by facilities, laboratories, and local government units. A bit not all, Pero for the first time, this is actually happening. Dati po, when we talk about dengue surveillance, typically what you see in the news is 3 weeks worth of data na siya bago siya mare-report, na ganito karami yung nagka-dengue. And that's really because there was no infrastructure or very lacking infrastructure for submission of data. And because of COVID, these have been accelerated to a certain extent. Data transparency and public release. So we're the only country that releases line lists of data. So I don't know if some of you are data enthusiasts, you can download the DOH, the COVID-19 data from the DOH website. So we've actually been lauded for doing such. And because this is parang difficult times, no, pandemic times, talagang merong days na you won't get good enough data, and then we have to adjust. No? So we hope that sort of like explains why some days you have to adjust certain numbers there. And then appreciation on the value of data in ICT, policies guided by evidence and data, etc. No? So, but at the same time, we also know that this is not enough. No? May issue po tayo pa rin on consistency. Not all submit at the same time. Not all submit the same way. So because our health system is devolved, whatever we get, we're dependent on local government units. The speed, some remain resistant to use ICT. There's learning curve, and then there are issues on the structure as well. No? Connectivity, lack of hardware, info system, and then encoders or human resources. And then finally, mga data privacy concerns. So ito po yung ideal lang na flow of the data, no? And you will see nasaan yung DOH dito, no? So the entire thing has to be captured by the COVID Kaya system, which was built by DOH with WHO with the support of the ICT, no? So when you have a patient who goes in to a facility, an LGU or the lab, then some data will be captured there. Di po ba? So, pag nagpa-lab kayo, yung results nyo, saan siya mapupunta, no? So, we should capture it. And then, if you happen to be admitted in the facility and then you get tested, whatever your status is, nasa ICU ka ba, etc., it also has to be captured. Then, when you get out, what your results are, it's given back to the patient. Whatever that is has to be captured also. And that data will then be the one that will be used to initiate contact tracing. And then kung naka-retain ka pa rin sa hospital, kung biglang na-discharge ka, namatay ka, whatever, that has to be again encoded into the system. So the entire point here is that there's so many interfaces, the submission of data is not a one-time thing. For my record, Beverly Ho, for example, when I get encoded into it, it doesn't stop with just the lab submitting it, diba? My LGU has to be able to say, na-contact trace na namin yan, tapos na yan ang isolation, etc. So, any one of these actors who failed to encode in the system will mean we wouldn't have that data. So, there have been many initiatives overall, and I won't go through it. But I just wanted to emphasize what are the main issues, no, na laging naging complaint ng public or some of our media practitioners. So we can lodge the issues in three main buckets. No? First would be interpretation of terminologies. Second would be counting of official cases. And third, reporting through official DOH mechanisms. So for the first one, typically, the biggest issue here would be the line list and aggregates. No, some of our LGUs would report aggregate data, meaning there's actually no line list. You wouldn't know whether 1 is Pedro, 2 is Juan, 3 is Ricardo, right? It's really just total amounts, and that's why it's not matching with what we have, because in our system, every person has to be accounted for, because you need to know the age, comorbidity, etc. of that certain person, diba? So we're fixing this slowly, moving everyone to not count in aggregates, but actually in line list. And I know your group is quite familiar with these things, no? Parang we will die if it's all aggregation, diba? Next would be counting of official cases. Some patients will register their current address. So if they're an OFW, they'll put Manila. Or they'll put their province. Diba? So magkakaroon ng issue with the LGU whether they register that one case, those 10 cases to them or to Manila, right? Some of the cases have not been seen by the LGUs because the patients went directly to the laboratory, did not coordinate with the VHERT, no? So you end up having a lot of cases coming from the labs, but the LGU says, oh, they're not our cases, diba? And then you have cases that cannot be found, and also certain LGU preferences on how to tag cases, no? So all of these slowly were addressing it, and with the help of CABSEC, for example, dahan-dahan, each of the LGU, we have bilateral meetings with them as well. Then, in terms of reporting through official DOH mechanisms, we still have issues of not all disease reporting units, including some of our hospitals and isolation facilities, not being able to submit in a timely manner. Manual forms are still sent to us for encoding, and currently our main source is laboratory. So most of the numbers that we have on a day-to-day basis comes from the laboratories, and that's why we know we actually have all of the cases, diba, that are tested in the labs, because the labs submit completo to us. But whether or not those data are updated, kasi diba, the lab can submit my status, but whether I became severe today or I recovered today, that's something that has to be inputted by the LGU, no, or by the hospital themselves. So doon tayo nagkakaroon ng inconsistencies. So in short, what do we just want to say? No? So meron pang mga encoding errors, forms not completely filled out. So you'll see that 25 to 55% of what we get have no address or contact numbers. Sometimes the address of the laboratory or the address of the hospital is actually the address, diba? The proxy. We have ongoing verification process and differences in extraction time. That's why some would say, bakit yan yung number nyo? Bakit yan yung number namin? No? So overall, in short, to keep the presentation, this would be my last slide. So DOH is merely a receiver, or consolidator of information submitted throughout the country by labs, by hospitals, and by LGUs, no? And we are highly reliant on the quality of data provided from the source. And I think the tech people would call it GIGO, no? Garbage in, garbage out. Submission to DOH will make the information usable at all levels, because the system, the COVID Kaya, all of the stakeholders would actually have access to. Non-compliant DRUs may be prosecuted under the Notifiable Diseases Act. We actually are requesting, all the DRUs or disease reporting units to actually submit accurate, complete, and timely data to us. So we hope that with this presentation, we've perhaps increased your understanding about how to interpret the statistics that we actually read from our DOH tracker or the news reports. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ho. You actually have answered a lot of the questions I had about the numbers and what the DOH is doing, and I'm very grateful. I'm kind of enlightened right now. I'm sure there will be a lot more questions later. I'm receiving already a lot of questions specifically also for you. But before we go there, our next speaker is the Acting Secretary of the National Economic and Development Authority. Secretary Karl Chua was appointed to the position in April this year. He was previously Undersecretary for the Strategy, Economics, and Resource Group of the Department of Finance, where he advocated for and led efforts to implement tax reform in the country. Prior to joining the government, he worked for the World Bank from 2004 to 2016 and taught mathematics and economics at the Ateneo de Manila University. Ladies and gentlemen, let me present Acting NEDA Secretary Karl Chua.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Am I supposed to start now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, just give me a moment. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. This presentation will focus on the update on the economy and our recovery program and what policy making entails so that everyone will have a better understanding of what government will have to go through in this recovery program. But before I start with the main presentation, there are two economic principles that I want you to memorize, dream about, and apply, because these are the two foundations before we can proceed with the presentation. The first one is nothing is free from heaven. Many people probably want to be supported by some form of incentive, subsidy, an allowance. However, all of these are not free, and the government will have to generate it. And the government is not an organization that can create the cash. It is actually funded by the contribution of the people, called taxes, or through borrowings that we ask our children or grandchildren to pay later on. The second trade-off is, the second economic principle is everything is a trade-off. Because we have finite resources like time or budget, we are not able to satisfy everything that we want. So if we make a decision, there will be winners, there will be losers. And part of this policy exercise is to help compensate the losers, because we believe that over the medium to long term, this is the right policy going forward. So let me begin the presentation with a vision that we had in 2016, and that was to reduce the poverty rate from 21.6 to 14% of the population by 2022. What that means is we lift 6 million Filipinos out of poverty, and the poverty line is about 70 pesos per person per day. And by 2040, that is in our long-term vision, the ambition natin 2040, we would have eradicated extreme poverty. What that means is no one is hungry. At the same time, we want our country to advance to upper middle income status by 2022, where Thailand and China are today. And by 2040, to achieve high income status, where Japan and South Korea are today. And that is the vision that we have for the medium term and over the long term. And the achievement so far is very good. Prior to COVID, what we saw was a significant drop in our poverty rate. The revised numbers are 23.5% base in 2015. And what we actually saw in 2018 was a significant reduction in the poverty rate to 16.7%. What that means is we already lifted 6 million Filipinos out of poverty 4 years ahead of our 2022 target. And prior to COVID, achieving the 14% would have been very easy. Now, things have changed, and I will explain later how that might affect our socioeconomic performance. And the reason why we were able to significantly move towards attaining that poverty progress is that we have achieved a lot under our 10-point socioeconomic agenda. This is the promise that the Duterte administration laid out in 2016, a 10-point socioeconomic agenda where the green boxes that you see have all been substantially achieved, and we are working on the remaining yellow boxes. So we have maintained strong macroeconomic policies, and our credit ratings show that we are one of the most respected countries globally because of our macro and fiscal prudence and responsibility. We have done 4 tax reforms. We have reduced the tax rates for 99% of the people. At the same time, we were able to raise other taxes to fund the infrastructure program. We have the ease of doing business law. We have increased our infrastructure spending to close to 1 trillion pesos in the last 2 years. We have proceeded with rural development, initially with the rice tariffication law, which brought down the price of rice by around 10 pesos per kilo relative to 2018, and at the same time provided farmers with up to 60 billion peso guaranteed over the next 6 years to improve their productivity. We have also passed the Universal Healthcare Law, we passed the Innovations Act, and we also passed the National ID, which are all being implemented as we speak. And there will be improvements as the months and years go by. So this is the progress in achieving the 10-point socioeconomic agenda. So in other words, our foundations are very good. Unfortunately, COVID struck us. No one expected this in this country or globally. And the priority that we have put at the top was to save lives from COVID in the first 100 days. So we achieved a daily testing peak of 39,930 on August 7. Our testing capacity is almost 85,000 as of August 16. We averted, according to two models, some 59,000 to 171,000 deaths compared to the around 3,000 that we actually see today. And we averted up to 3.5 million infections compared to the almost 200,000 that we see today, of which 68,000 of them, if we did not do any community quarantine, would be sick simultaneously during the peak day, and that would overwhelm our hospital system. Unfortunately, the costs are that we shut down 75% of the economy. Our economy contracted by 0.7% in the first quarter and more in the second quarter. Unemployment rate reached 17.7%, meaning 7 million people were unemployed. And this is what we did to immediately support the people who are affected and our healthcare system by mobilizing a total of 655 billion pesos to support vulnerable groups and our resources to fight COVID, including giving the biggest ever social protection subsidy to 18 million low-income families and 3.1 million workers of small businesses. And I think many of you have benefited, your workers have benefited from this. The consequence, of course, was that our economic growth as measured by GDP fell significantly by 16.5. This is the biggest on record for in the last almost 40 years compared to our solid performance in the past few years at around 5, 6, or 7%. Fortunately, because of the improvements in our healthcare system that allowed us to open more of the economy, we are seeing several reversals. So our manufacturing production has begun a U-turn in the last couple of months. We are also seeing a U-turn in the exports. They are still negative, but not as bad as we saw them at the height of the ECQ. And in fact, our exports to China has turned positive in June. The reason why we are able to address this crisis at a better footing is that we have actually been working very hard on maintaining a very strong economic position. Our economic growth in the first 4 years of the administration averaged 6.6%. This is actually one of the highest in our history, highest history of continuous growth. And also compared to the rest of the world, this is very respectable. We were likely to become an upper middle income country prior to COVID. That is 2 years in advance. We had low and stable inflation. We have one of the strongest fiscal positions in terms of the highest revenue and the lowest debt as a share of our GDP. And that was enabled by the tax reform. Our infrastructure program increased significantly. Our credit rating reaches A-. What that means is we are able to keep interest rates very low, not only for the government, but for the entire country, and including individual borrowers like you who may be borrowing for your business or for your housing or car loan. And we have seen one of the lowest unemployment and underemployment rates and poverty, as I mentioned. Unfortunately, this is not going to be easy for everyone. We are going to see significant impact on the lives of the people. That is why we are going to work double to improve the having equal opportunity for everyone. And what that means is providing every student the chance to finish school, every mother the chance to be healthy so that they can give birth and take care of healthy children who with the cognitive skills will allow them to finish school and get a better job. COVID will make that more difficult, but we will have to double our efforts. What we are also seeing now after almost 5 months of, or more than 5 months, roughly 5 months of quarantine is that this virus is going to be with us for quite a longer time. Initially, we were using the SARS-1 model that within 6 months we would have addressed the problem. Now, globally, experts and many countries have
shown us that this is not going to be an easy way out. In fact, 126 out of 188 countries are experiencing recurrences, increases in the number of cases, even those that have seemingly solved it in the preceding months. So this will be a drawn-out struggle. We will be in a marathon rather than in a sprint. So we will have to balance and use all our resources in a very prudent manner. And we will have to learn to dance with this virus. Sometimes we move 2 steps forward. Like 2 weeks ago, we will have to move a step backwards. When the virus or the infections increase, then we will have to have some more stringent level of quarantine so that we can help and prepare our healthcare system and the people's safety better. One of the things that NEDA is working on is that as we open the economy, we also have to ensure that people are able to go back to work. This is foot traffic, visits to public transport station as measured by Google. And you will see that there is a very big drop at the start of the ECQ, improved, but hardly any improvement since then. So that means that despite moving to the GCQ period, there are still many constraints that enable the full operation of public transport. We are also seeing that in terms of people actually going to work. So 40%, we are 40% down. Some may be working from home, but the sooner we can provide the opportunities to work for these people, the better it will be for the economy. We are also seeing 30% down in the number of people who shop for basic food and pharmacies. So all of these we are very aware of and are working with the rest of the government to ensure that we can strike a better balance between saving lives from COVID and saving lives from all other factors such as hunger and other diseases. Our response is a phased and adaptive recovery approach, wherein during Bayanihan 1, we had the emergency stage. Congress recently ratified and the President will soon sign Bayanihan 2, which is the recovery stage. And as we move towards next year, we will still continue to work on the resiliency of the Philippines. So this is the phased approach, which I will not discuss in detail at this point. Let me update you on the present recovery program of the government. As I mentioned, we have Bayanihan 2. We also have our infrastructure program because that is where the biggest multiplier will be. We also have our 2021 budget that the President submitted to Congress yesterday. Under Bayanihan 2, we will continue to support the key areas of our society and economy. It is a health problem foremost. So the first two are addressing really the healthcare system so that we can also enhance the testing, tracing, isolation, and treatment so that we can boost confidence. When people know that they will be taken care of, they will not get sick, then they will go out and spend. And this will help bring our economy back. We are also supporting public transport, among others, through service contracting. So providing subsidy to allow the public transport to still operate even at reduced capacity. Then we will also support critical affected sectors in the economy and capital infusion to our government financial institutions so that they can have more capital to lend to small businesses such as you, and also to lend and help smaller banks. There are two parts in the House version that were not passed, and we are working with Congress to get them passed. So these complete the package of recovery. The first is the guide or arise provisions, basically to provide equity or capital support to the insolvent firms that are very important for the economic recovery. And also a FIST, which is basically the acronym that allows a special purpose vehicle to help bank dispose bad loans and assets so that they can lend more to other clients. So earlier, I mentioned that the two economic principles that you need to remember, if everything else is forgotten, is that first, nothing is free from heaven and everything is a trade-off. This is basically saying that there's no perfect solution. If you want to play video games, but you still have to sleep, work, and eat, then you probably will have a hard time trying to fit everything that you want to do within your schedule. And every time you move, there will be significant trade-offs, for instance, your sleep. In reality, policymakers will have to face major trade-offs as we make a decision on where we would put our scarce resources. So some of these trade-offs are whether we help industry X or industry Y. Everyone is affected by COVID, some worse than others, but resources are limited, so we will have to put our support to the most affected sectors. The second is whether we help you cope today or tomorrow. If the virus stays for 5 years and we put all our money out today, then what will be used to help or feed people next year? So this is something we also have to balance. The third one is whether we want to go for higher growth, meaning we spend more and have a more or a bigger stimulus, or we have a more conservative fiscal position because we don't know how long this will last. We can put all the money out today and nothing will be left tomorrow, and the virus could still be there for 5 years. So that has to be very well balanced. The fourth one is whether we support through the fiscal or the monetary side. And in this country, we are using both. And because we have far more resources in the monetary, we will also put a lot of support through the monetary or financial side. One thing we also have to balance is whether we want to just be focusing on the macroeconomics or economic growth or the welfare of every person. And finally, all of this will entail significant resources that cannot be raised through tax alone. So we will have to borrow. But ask yourselves if you are willing for the government to borrow so much and your children will pay for it. So the important question here is really what is the optimal balance? And it's not an easy thing to do, especially in a very difficult crisis. Three final requests or ideas that you may want to also memorize, dream about, or apply in your life is first, or number three, you know the facts. And it's easy right now to just open your phone or computer and be flooded with many things, many which are not verified. Number four is to work with the government to contribute solutions, but don't just tell us what to do. That is actually the easy part. The harder part, or more challenging, which responsible citizens can contribute, is how to do it, given our political, institutional, resource, and other constraints. And finally, to invite all of you to share the good news. It's easy in any crisis or any situation to just focus on the bad news, but forget that there are also many good things that are happening, especially those that are given less regard. And you know this because you have a chance perhaps to eat in a restaurant, you are served bad food, you complain. But if you are served good food, you hardly will praise the chef or the restaurant. So with that, I would like to end my presentation with a plea for every one of us to care more for each other and work together. We are not all in the same boat, but we are all in the same storm. So this is a call for everyone to work together. Thank you very much.
Yeah, there. Yeah, thank you, Sec. Karl Chua. It is nice to be reminded how strong our economy is prior to COVID. And I'm very happy to hear that we have a strong potential to bounce back. And you are correct that I think it would be best that we would focus on the good news and be open to it. And us in the private sector should be able to help you, help the government also, to collaborate with the government to solve and really bounce back from this crisis. Yeah. Currently, unfortunately, we're still waiting for Mayor Magalang as he's previous meeting. So what we'll do now is we'll just start with the open forum. There's quite a few questions already. Again, you can put your questions to the QA or chat at the Zoom app. Or if you want to ask your questions on camera, you can raise your hand and we'll get back to you. So let me start with the first question for Secretary Karl Chua. One of the questions was, how can the government assist the private sector in lowering the cost of operations to avert layoffs? Is there like tax relief or we saw earlier that there are programs to help this on the rise. I think would it be possible to elaborate more on the specifics on that one?
Well, yes, thank you very much for the question. We are helping as many businesses as possible with a combination of support. So it will be a combination of cash grants, subsidies, also credit guarantees, and more affordable lending. Just be mindful that all resources are not free. So we will have to make a very good allocation of these. So just to give you an idea, we started already early in the year during the ECQ to provide one of the biggest subsidies for employees of small businesses, and also for the 18 million informal or low-income families. Under Bayanihan 2, a number of support are provided. Number one, we have given the financial institutions of the government like DBP and Land Bank some 50 billion peso. That seed money can be used to lend almost 900 billion peso. And we are going to support and bring down the borrowing costs using three ways. Number one, we will subsidize the interest payment. Number two, we will provide credit guarantees. And number three, because we are providing a lot of liquidity to the banks, these are actually going to help bring down borrowing rates. So those are the ways that we will support. There are also in the Bayanihan 2 a number of areas also. So for the very distressed sectors and their workers in quarantine areas, there are also wage subsidies and emergency cash operating loss carryover for losses this year and next year. That can be carried over in the next 5 years. So these are the menu of support that are going to be provided to businesses.
Oh, that's very exciting. That's really good news. Just to add to follow-up question on that one. There's some banks that are not lending or have stricter loan policies right now, and are also some are not renewing current loans. Is there a way that what kind of business or an SME do if encountered with this one?
Well, you know, the banks are banks, and if they just lend to everyone without doing due diligence, then there's a big chance that the banks will fail. Similarly, all of you who have tried to lend to your friend or someone cannot also lend to just everyone. You'll have to do your due diligence. So the first priority really is to let the banks do their work properly so that they can maintain a sound financial system so that they can help those that who really qualified. Now, because there is a lot of risk aversion, the government is coming in with additional support. That is why we are putting more money into the financial system. That is why we are subsidizing the interest rate so that it will be easier for the banks to see the client as lower risk. And we are providing credit guarantees. So the government provides the enabling environment to allow the banks to operate and serve their clients better. Of course, the clients will have to do their share to, of course, be responsible and manage their companies well, so that this prudent cycle of helping the firms and also the firms later on paying at the appropriate time would be how we should proceed.
Thank you for that. There's another question here for Sec Chua. When do you think our economy can recover? Could it be possible by early 2021?
Okay, there are two things that I would like to highlight. The first is, 90% of the recovery is in your hands. If you practice the health standards and social distancing and don't go out and follow the quarantine rules and the curfew, then you should be okay. I know I go to the office every day for 3 months already in my new job. I don't really get sick. So long as you follow the standards, you don't dine with other people, you wash your hands, you wear a mask. I think that is the key. And if you look at the other countries that were successful, there's no magic bullet. It's everyone cooperating. On the other hand, the government realizes that for the economy to recover, it needs to have a stimulus. And that is why we are working on this set of recovery packages, the Bayanihan 2, the resumption of our infrastructure program, and a higher budget for next year. And that will provide the additional boost to the economy to recover sooner.
Perfect. Thanks for that. The next question is actually for Dr. Ho. Ma'am, we have a question from our dear friend, Marlene Alberto. She said certain LGUs require RATs results before they issue medical clearance certificates for delivery personnel, which are required by many clients to be submitted every 14 days. The medical certificate is supposed to assure the client that delivery personnel are not infected with COVID-19 while delivering to the client's premises. The requirement for RATs every 14 days is quite costly for truckers. Since RATs determine past infection, is the RATs requirement every 14 days a sound strategy to prevent the spread of disease? I remember you touched on this, but this is a very sensitive. There's a very relevant topic for us transporters because we deliver between different LGUs, different provinces, and this is what we encountered. This is currently one of the major breakdown in the supply chain.
So we reiterate our policy that's been heavily consulted with our medical society, with various medical societies. And also, most recently, we've touched base again with ULAP, the Union of Local Authorities of the Philippines, and we reiterated the different uses of such tests. So we might need to forward this again to our colleagues in the DILG so that they may be able to remind our local chief executives of yung limitations of such tests, sir.
There's another question for Dr. Ho. For returning employees, since employees have been working from home since March, are they allowed to request the local health centers for the medical certificate without going through the 14-day test? Or day 1 of day 14 will start at the time request was made and certificate will only be given after 14 days?
So the 14-day test is applicable for, sorry, the question is, will they need to request for a certification po?
Yes.
So typically you request for the certification from your medical practitioner, di ba? Or is there a company physician, for example, who will attest that the last 14 days you actually didn't have any symptoms? But then there's also a different certification for someone who's completed quarantine. No? So typically you request for yung certification of completion of home quarantine from your barangay health emergency response team. So yung BHERT mo. So here in this particular case, if you don't have a medical practitioner inside your company, then you can actually go to your health center, no, and just say na I didn't have any symptoms the last 14 days. Can they actually issue a certificate for you? If not, within the company naman po, you can also just have this policy. So as long as they're able to certify that they didn't have any symptoms, okay na po sila. They can actually go in. So that's why it also requires parang a level of trust and a trusting relationship between your employees and the employer.
Okay. Thanks for that. Just another question. A question for Dr. Ho again. Is there a progress in the development of vaccine, particularly here in our country? Do we have an ongoing research? And also, second, connected to that is, what can you say about currently the new saliva test developed in Israel? Is that something that we're going to implement also here?
I think all of the technologies, we are open to adopting them as long as there are, so first they have to be FDA registered. It means you won't be harmed when you use them. And second of all, they just need to be validated, right? There are many tools, but if whether they whatever they say is accurate or not is another thing, no? And if it might raise more confusion rather than support the response or ease the response, then we won't recommend them. So we're open to any technology, and they're going to be evaluated by both the FDA and RITM naman po if it comes to adopting it. In terms of your first question on, sorry, what was it na?
The saliva test.
No, you had another question.
The other one. Is there a development of a vaccine?
The vaccine. So far,
here, locally.
So far in all of our correspondences with DOST, what we have are we will be a trial arm for internationally developed vaccines. No, wala pa po tayong. No one has submitted any local studies to develop a vaccine here.
Okay, thanks for that. So I have my next question is for CAPSEC Karlo Nograles. One of the questions, especially for food security, are there programs to mitigate occurrences of spoilage of fruits and vegetables and ease of transport to waste? Because we know that food is highly perishable. So isang hours lang when you harvest it with the delivery. It can go as high as, from what I understand, it can go as high as 70% at the most na spoilage. So do we have for food security and zero hunger, do we have programs that can mitigate this?
Marami. Actually, what we're doing right now is we're currently doing the national food policy, no? So we're looking at all the different aspects pertaining to food, from food productivity to addressing nutrition or hidden hunger to accessibility of food to food resiliency. No? And syempre, yung mga lumalabas na mga interventions na kinakailangan ng government, and we would also need private sector help here as well. Not in terms of better infrastructure, but more facilities tulad ng mga storage facilities, refrigeration facilities, anything that will reduce any post-harvest losses as well, kasama na dyan. And then of course, in accessibility naman, not only our usual programs of ensuring that food products get to the markets and its availability in markets, but we also have to look at digital markets as well, no? So meron tayong yung isang sinusuporta ng SCMAP, yung scan dashboard, which hopefully addresses whatever bottlenecks that remain, no? During these pandemic times and post-pandemic, maging magandang tool din yun. So inspired by that tool, we're also looking at different tools to enable our farmers to be linked up to our private sector, to the private sector, no? In terms of markets, in terms of ensuring that at least yung mga private sector players natin have access or is able to link up with these farmer organizations. Kami sa gobyerno, meron din tayong tinatawag na Enhanced Partnership Against Hunger and Poverty program, which seeks to link small farmers organizations like agrarian farm beneficiary organizations, irrigators associations, and community-based organizations ng farmers na accredited ng Department of Agriculture, linking them up to our institutional feeding programs. So meron tayong school feeding program na isa batas na yon, meron tayong supplemental feeding program for daycare center children, and meron din po tayong feeding programs na pinapilot for pregnant women, lactating women, and children from 6 months to 23 months old, no? In fulfillment of the first 1,000 days of life. So all of our feeding programs, we are now seeking to link them up with our small farmers organizations para wala nang middleman. Diretso nang ibebenta or bibilhin ng gobyerno yung ani ng ating mga maliliit na mga magsasaka. So hindi na dadaan ng middleman, direktang isusupply na ng mga farmers organizations straight to DSWD, DepEd, or mga LGUs, and even government hospitals, city jails, provincial jails, and the like. So that way, lahat ng kita, diretso na sa mga magsasaka at sa kanilang mga organizations. No? In the same manner, if we are able to apply the same principle in the private sector through digital technology, through online technology, online transactions, we hope to be able to achieve the same thing. No? So from small farmers organizations, wala nang middlemen, isusupply na nila direkta sa mga private buyers using those online apps. So ang Department of Agriculture, meron silang e-Kadiwa. Yung DTI, meron ding platform, online platform na ginagamit, sinusuportahan ng USAID, AID, and I think Karlo knows about this. There's a bit of a back and forth here kung pwede na ba natin i-launch yan. And obviously, the missing link there would be the in the supply chain will be the logistics. So it's not enough that you link the farmers organizations to the private institution buyers. Paano yung delivery system? So maganda sana kung meron tayong integrated platform kung saan nandun din yung supply chain. Para pag nag-agree na yung dalawa, ang buyer at ang seller, meron tayong tig-deliver nun. Diba? So, dun papasok ang SCMAP. And I'm wondering if this was a planted question. Pero sige lang. I will play along.
Hindi ko lang, actually hindi siya planted, pero meron actually mas planted pa eh. Pero I'll do that question. Again, sir, there's another question for you. Our food security is very important, especially in this time of pandemic. However, have noted that the government has not contained ASF problem. I think this is African swine fever. What is the plan of the government to fully eradicate the ASF hog problem?
It's still something that the Department of Agriculture is still currently handling right now. Of course, we were able to. Ang maganda dito is that number one, we were always on the lookout, for this disease, this dreaded disease. So immediately when we were able to, when it came to our shores, kumbaga, so immediately we acted on it. But the thing about this ASF kasi is it really needs not just government support, but private sector, community support, local government, down to the barangay level. So kailangan talaga ng support ng lahat ng ating mga stakeholders dito. We have not, I don't know if na-eradicate na, we still get reports of its occurrence in certain areas. But immediately pag may na-detect or may nabalitaan kami yan, we immediately act on it naman. And then meron naman tayong ginagawang hakbang, much like COVID-19, di ba? Na we create certain zones, containment zones, just like our approach to COVID-19. And then culling will necessarily have to follow. And then all of the safety protocols ginagawa natin. It's a challenge, and right now, especially pag COVID-19, because the challenge really is getting boots on the ground, so to speak, and ensuring na walang mahahawa ng COVID-19. So it makes it more challenging to do the actual implementation on the ground. Pero meron naman tayong protocols regarding that.
So again, going back to food security, you mentioned that there's going to be a direct link, the farmers and the buyers, right? So aside from increasing the income of the farmers, this will also increase it will greatly reduce waste, right? So and then what kind of reductions of waste and how yung savings ba magagawa also for the buyer side from your feeding program, all of that stuff?
Yeah, well, syempre food wastage is also a concern, especially during these pandemic times. I've seen several bills filed in the Senate seeking to create food banks also. something that we're still currently studying, the feasibility of it. But more than anything, I think really it's a mindset, and it's just like our challenges in COVID-19. We really need behavioral change here in terms of food wastage. No, so that's on the consumer or the consumption side. No, in terms of trying to reduce food waste on the consumption side. On the supply side, yeah, the faster we are able to get the goods to the market and make it accessible, then the less food waste we will be seeing. And I think the image that comes to mind with everybody is that time during the early fight against COVID-19 pandemic, we saw a lot of vegetables going into waste kasi hindi nakarating sa merkado. Regrettably, the more nutritious food products are those that madaling mabulok, fruits and vegetables. And in the fight against COVID-19, ensuring the availability of nutritious food like fruits and vegetables sa mga markets is something that is necessary, no? If we want to increase the immunity of certain vulnerable sectors like children, pregnant women, etc. No, we have to make fruits and vegetables part of the food basket that we hope to be able to provide the most needy of our population, and dapat kasama yan sa mga feeding programs na ginagawa natin. So if you look at our EPAP program, karamihan ng mga produkto na yung bias namin towards are fruits and vegetables. Vegetables actually, a lot of vegetables. So marami sa mga pinapartner namin farmers organizations have supplied us sa feeding programs natin with vegetables. That's something that we want to put some focus on also. So yun. And then of course other initiatives of what that we're doing also is gulayan sa paaralan, urban gardening, urban vegetable gardening sa mga barangay, sa mga urban areas and urban areas. So these are some of the initiatives also that we're doing so that mas malapit na yung supply ng vegetables sa urban markets. And we've seen some documents wherein supermarkets in other countries, what they do is they go into contract farming. And maybe that's also a push that we want to explore sa private sector. If more of the private sector can engage in contract farming, means say, kontrata ninyo mga maliit na magsasaka, sila yung mag-grow ng mga vegetables or fruits or these agricultural products na may kontrata na bibilhin ninyo. No? So some countries are doing that, and they call it either contract farming or corporate farming. So these are ideas that we're also exploring sa Zero Hunger task force namin.
That's great. That's great. I have another question for you, sir, and for Secretary Chua. So the question is, how will the government address the very high unemployment rate of 7 million Filipinos? We can start with you, and then next will be Secretary Chua. Capsec.
Si Sec Chua na lang muna, tapos ako na lang.
Sige.
Hey, thank you very much. I'll just give an intro, then Cabsec will fill in the important ones. Okay, I think there are three things that the government is doing right now to address the increased level of unemployment. The first one, as you have seen sa Bayanihan 2, we have put a lot of money on the healthcare system and in the testing, tracing, isolation, and treatment. The sooner we get this part of the recovery program addressed, the sooner the confidence of the people will come back. And they, once are confident, they will go back to work. The second is we will help stimulate the economy with our infrastructure spending. That has the highest multiplier. In other words, for every 1 peso we spend on infra, the return is almost 1 peso more. And we have seen that in the last 4 years, how the Build, Build, Build program has reduced our unemployment, poverty, and underemployment rates to the lowest ever in our record. And then the third one is on public transport. We are working also to get as many of them back safely and securely, so that people can also go back to work. So in all these, the government is not the main driver or the creator of jobs. We are the enabler, and these are how we aim to address to get the unemployment numbers going down. Thank you. So that was an intro for a more profound answer by Cabsec.
Siyempre, we also know, thank you, Sec Carl. Actually, we also know that one of the drivers for employment is also our micro, small, and medium enterprises. No? A bulk of our industries belong to that sector. So what we want also to do is, apart from confidence building sa mga MSMEs, hopefully through the Bayanihan 2 law and the funding support that was approved by Congress, we'll be able to stimulate more MSMEs. No? Those that were existing MSMEs, we hope to be able to get them back on their feet. While doing that, we also hope to be able to stimulate the growth or the establishment of more MSMEs para they can also provide jobs for our people. And stimulation, also, one of the agencies or departments na hindi masyado natin tinitingnan, DOH, and shift towards that direction, science and technology and information and communications technology, especially in this digital age. Then we'll have to create an enabling environment. So learning online also through TESDA, through CHED, through state universities and colleges, making information available online to help give our people some ideas on what sort of businesses businesses that they can come up with. Then finally, stimulate growth also in the countryside. No, especially in areas where mababa yung incidence of COVID-19, which is basically in the countryside, in mga probinsya, maraming mga regions and provinces dyan that they've been very successful in handling the COVID-19 situation in their respective provinces and regions. So they have a distinct advantage of being under MGCQ. So necessarily movement there would be less unhampered and less restrictive yung mga enforcements ng mga community quarantine rules, no, and protocols. So these are the things that we're looking at. We have to look for areas where we can grow, no, and I guess my bias, because I'm sa zero hunger, would be agriculture. So example, I just like to give you an example, no, of an idea. DOST FNRI, just to cap up my discussion about opportunities here. We have an agency called the Food Nutrition Research Institute under DOST. So it's DOST FNRI, and they've long been coming up with different formulations of nutritious food products. And we want to be able to have these products available for our supplemental and school feeding programs for kids, for children. But there aren't a lot of adopters of the technology, and the technology is free. Huh? I mean, it's something that DOST FNRI would be willing to provide and create some sort of technology transfer to any adopter who's willing to adopt the technology. So you've got, products like the Nutriban, the enhanced Nutriban. They call it the enhanced Nutriban now. You have products like vegetable-based noodles instead of just instant noodles. You have products like emergency response, ready-to-eat, nutritious, instant, instant arroz caldo, instant laing, instant pochero, instant pinakbet. So all of these food technologies, and they need a lot of adopters. So so look at science and technology, look at the ICT, industry. There's so many opportunities there. And I think, like what Secretary Karl said, government is going to be the enabler, but people just have to jump at these opportunities and not let them pass. Don't look at COVID-19 as something that, that is a hindrance to business. There are many opportunities out there that we just need to take a look at and, take the leap forward. And government will be there to help in whatever way we can.
Nice to know that government is really helping. Really looking forward to help our country bounce back from this. I have another question for Dr. Ho. I know she has a next meeting also. Pero sabi I requested one or two more questions before kasi madami talaga questions here. So one of the questions is why does LGUs have different standards on dealing with recovered cases? Some of them are still recovered patients for RT-PCR testing. Based on the discussion earlier, testing is not needed for those deemed recovered, right? And how can we bring it down to the LGU level na these requirements hindi na kailangan?
So, sir, yeah. Okay, so we try to put in standards, pero we understand that some of the LGUs actually are in different stages of the pandemic, no? So some of them have actually so some of the LGUs are in the parang earlier stages of the pandemic, and how they describe it to us is that they're having difficulty explaining it also to reassure their constituents. No? So I think a lot of it relies on constant reassurance and frequent, I guess, emphasis on the science of the recovery. So it's not just actually the local chief executives, but also their own health staff, as well as the barangay leaders, the community leaders who may or may not actually be comfortable receiving the patients back into the community unless they actually see the test result. So yes, sir. So it's actually more a mix of just the knowledge part with the, I guess, psychological part of hindi na ba talaga sila nakakahawa.
And then yung second question, a follow-up on that. One of our participants asked if there are 2 confirmed cases of COVID in a company. Will this be a scenario for temporary closure of the workplace? And if it is, how long would you recommend?
Actually, sir, based on current guidelines and discussions, it's not mandatory, no? So we recognize that, for example, we are in NCR and workplaces are huge, diba? Some of the factories will have different buildings, etc. So it's actually unfair and non-scientific anymore to lock down the entire office. No, you just need to have localized disinfection, and that disinfection could run between 4 to 8 hours. So it doesn't even need to be locked down for 24 to 48 hours. So pero na po tayong protocols for that, localized disinfection lang yung kailangan, and then contact tracing.
Perfect. There's a couple more, pero I know you've extended your time also for us. We'd like to thank Dr. Beverly Ho also for gracing us and learned so much. We've learned so much, and I'm sure there's so many questions and there's so many acknowledgements here that thanking everybody also on the panel what they've learned. And we thank you for your time also. But Kabsec and Sec Karl, meron pa mga tanong dito. Hindi pa tayo tapos. Let me just browse through the other. So there actually for Kabsec, Karlo Nograles, there's actually a lot of questions on tourism. There's actually 3 questions here. Is there like a government program or maybe a solution on how we can get tourism back on board? Because remember, we have tourism is one of our shining stars before COVID. So is there a way we can bring it back?
Slowly. Like, really depends on the situation, no? So mas advantage syempre yung mga areas na under MGCQ. So that in itself already gives you a clear indication of what we need to do to get tourism back on its feet. And that is to create more MGCQ areas in the Philippines. Unfortunately, Manila, NCR, and most of our neighboring provinces is still under GCQ. But for those areas na MGCQ, that gives a bit of more confidence for the local government units to open up their areas to tourism. So some LGUs who are under MGCQ have already started accepting tourists and tourists from MGCQ areas. Tapos kung galing naman sa GCQ, syempre yung iba tentative, but others they'll just put some protocols pagdating ng mga turista paglatag nila dun sa province na yon, and then pag sumunod naman sa mga protocols na yon, then they're okay about tourism. So that's the only choice. We really don't have much choice in that matter. Kasi it's a balancing act between what the national government wants and the realities on the ground sa mga local government units, diba? So yun. So I think the faster we're able to manage the situation, the lower the transmissions, the lower the cases, and the better for the tourism industry. In the meantime, kasama naman dyan sa Bayanihan 2 na batas na hiningi nating pirmahan ni Pangulo, yung pagtulong sa mga apektado sa tourism sector. No? So that's basically the situation in a nutshell.
We have another question for Secretary Karl Chua. It says here that it's good that we have a stimulus package, but more of the question is, there specific industries that we're going to focus on? Because kanina it was more general on the MSMEs. Is there specific industries that we're looking at stimulating more? Because like they said, maybe a peso here is equivalent to 5 pesos return. Is there specific industries like that we are focusing on?
Well, the Bayanihan 2 enumerates the priority industries, including public transport, agriculture, tourism, healthcare, and the budget that we are operating right now has a lot on the infrastructure. So we are also using that. Next year's budget also will highlight the infrastructure, the digital, the water, housing, sanitation, and related areas that are needed for the new normal. So those are the priorities. Unfortunately, also, my 4 o'clock meeting is waiting. So, if there's a last question, we can take it now.
There's a last question also for both you and Secretary Nograles, but we'll start with you first. But first and foremost, thank you very much for spending your time. We know you're quite busy, and we appreciate so much the time that you shared with us, and we've learned a lot. So one of the questions here is on road infrastructure. You mentioned earlier infrastructure. On road infrastructure, government plans are great, but are poorly executed to some extent. How do government calibrate that plans are executed effectively and timely?
Well, first of all, if anyone has a good idea on how to execute it better, they're free to inform us. So I think we work in this whole of nation approach, especially in this crisis. So if there's any specific concern that you want to bring up, I'm happy to hear them. The second is, okay, since I don't know what specific concerns you have, let me discuss some of the things we're doing. Number one, we have actually just proceeded and implemented as fast as we can in the processing stage, in the right-of-way acquisition, in the preparation of the project, and in actually building it. 10 years ago, we just spent 100 billion per year on infrastructure. Last year, we spent close to 1 trillion. So that I think is very clear signal that this is all moving. And those of you who are in NCR or in the provinces know very well the number of projects that are actually being implemented and causing a bit of traffic for you. But the second one is part of the comprehensive tax reform package is the Land Valuation Act, so that we can properly value the property and not wait for 10 years to settle a right-of-way issue. You know, everyone wants a road, but if that road will pass through your property and you need to move for a common good, that person will not sell and will drag the whole case to court for 10 years. So, you know, we have to work together also on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Before you go, we would like to again thank you, Secretary Karl Chua, for your time. I know there's the meeting right now. Then we'll just move on now to Cabsec Nograles for the same question.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Cabsec.
Thank you, Sec Carl. Salamat. And good luck on your next meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Same question, Cabsec?
Yeah, no, going, kasi iba-iba yung infrastructure natin, di ba? So, iba rin yung mga implementers, no? So, well, right now, I know that Congress has received the National Expenditure Program for 2021. So that is the proposed national budget for 2021. And I have not seen it myself, but maraming nakapaloob naman doon sa panukalang pambansang budget na yan. Yung nakapaloob doon yung iba't ibang mga infrastructure projects that will be implemented for year 2021. So if there are any, you know, other suggestions or flagship programs that you think that we need to embark on, kaya sinabi ni Sec Carl na he's willing to listen because understandably dahil NEDA sila, then yung mga PPP, yung mga private infrastructure projects, unsolicited proposals passes through them, diba? So those are for the big projects. With the last 2 remaining years of the Duterte administration, ang instruction sa amin ni Pangulong Duterte is to focus all our attention on flagship projects that should be completed within his term or substantially completed during his term, no? So we kind of went through these flagship projects with under the leadership of Secretary Vince Dizon, and we kind of identified na lang kung ano yung mga remaining flagship projects that can be realized under the term of President Duterte, and that meant foregoing some of those projects because it's not truly feasible or hindi pa siya ready, shovel ready. And speaking of shovel ready, ang bias namin really are shovel ready projects. We don't want to go into projects that are not shovel ready, meaning to say maraming sakit sa ulo at hindi namin magagawa within the term of the president. That being said, DPWH naman also has a computer, has an ICT program which identifies, I forget what it's called, parang HDMF yata ang acronym ng program, but identifies saan pa yung mga major roads and highways na kailangan pa natin tapusin. So it's not really, you know, we decide on road projects out of the whim, but through a very scientific and data-driven analysis using available technology to determine what road sections need to be completed, what road sections ang may mga gaps pa, what are the broken road sections. And from the start of the term of the president, this was what we've been aiming to do. At the end of his term, lahat ng mga gaps should have been already, filled up. And that's for DPWH. Pero marami rin tayong convergence projects. We have roads leading to farm-to-market roads. We have convergence projects with DTI to find out, to plot out and construct roads leading to markets and industry areas. We have convergence projects with Department of Tourism to build roads leading to tourism areas also. So that's how we do our infrastructure, through convergence programs with different departments. So it's not just something that DPWH lang gumagawa, no? So maraming mga convergence points tayo with other departments as well.
Thank you for that. There are actually three, but two questions that are relatively the same. Going back again to food security, this is addressed to you, sir. Agricultural products are perishable, and the main problem is storage and transport. So, do you encourage private investments in cold storage facilities? And if what kind of investments are being handled, or is it a government investment? So, so that it can prevent storage in agricultural parts getting less spoilage. Is there a
No, absolutely. There is a world of opportunity for those who want to get into that sort of business. Especially now na nakikita natin one of our, well, actually the only seemingly the area of growth right now under this pandemic is agriculture. And I think if you can imagine, this pandemic, this situation of COVID-19 is not going to go away anytime soon. If you look at the timeline of vaccine, the earliest we can see a vaccine in the country would be May of next year. And that's the earliest. That's the kumbaga that is the most what do you call it? Yung best case scenario kumbaga. And it's not as if that vaccine will be available to the entire population in just one go. It won't be available to everyone by May. At the end of May, everyone is already has already the vaccine. No, it's going to be a series of vaccinations that will spill over from May to December of 2021. So. Agriculture is one sector of our economy that we hope to be able to sustain in terms of growth. And with the situation right now that more and more countries tend towards self-reliance in terms of food. So you will see that, there's really going to be a big need for food products to be going all around the country. So there's a really big area of opportunity for storage, for cold storage of food products. So if you want to go into that business, I think it's something that may work well with you, because sa government naman, of course, maraming challenges. It's not as if we can supply all of the facilities for storage for everyone, and the bias would certainly always be for the small farmers. So that means there's a big area of opportunity that can be shared by the private sector here.
And yeah, just going to the mention of the vaccine, there's another question here. It's asking, is government already talking with drug manufacturers so we can be assured of access of the vaccine?
Yes. The vaccine, we have several options of vaccine. No? We have ensured our memberships a COVAX facility. So that COVAX facility, marami sa mga vaccines that are in its advanced stages are part of that facility. That's one. The second is we're also part of the WHO solidarity trials for vaccine. So it's WHO for solidarity trials for medicine against COVID-19 and for vaccine. So dalawa yun. And then meron pa tayong bilateral agreements with different countries. An example of that would be yung sa Russia. But it's not just a bilateral agreement with Russia. We also have other bilateral agreements with other countries as well. And so the point I'm driving at is we're not putting all our eggs in one basket. We have many options. And necessarily so because we are a big population. So that's the reason why we are entering into these negotiations and agreements with different options on hand, so that if a vaccine is made available through any of these avenues, then we have access to it, number one. And eventually, all of these avenues naman, eventually somewhere along the road, they'll be able to develop a vaccine. So we need to provide vaccine for an estimated 60 million Filipinos. And when I say 60 million Filipinos, and you're asking, bakit hindi 110? We're 110 million Filipinos. Siyempre, government will prioritize the 60% of the population who cannot afford. And those that can afford will have to, pay for your own. Kasi kaya nyo naman eh. Kaya naman natin, di ba? So, yung bias ng government would obviously be those 60% who cannot afford the vaccine. So just the same, because of the huge of vaccines, but it's not vaccine, ha? Dalawang turok yan. It's not just one injection of a vaccine. You will need 2 doses of that vaccine. So times 2 pa yan. At syempre, ilan lang ba ang ma-manufacture ng per facility or per laboratory on a monthly basis? Then we'll have to share that with the entire world as well. So the point I'm driving at is we have many options para marami tayong pagkukunan, hindi tayo mauubusan. Sino yung mauuna, meron tayong opportunity to be one of those who will use it first. So we got all bases covered in this regard.
That's great. That's great. It's good to know that we're looking at the light at the end of the tunnel. Actually, we have one more question, and I think it's a good question. It's coming from one of our board members, Nes Felicio, a former president also. He said that for government, what is the look of success? How does the light at the end of the tunnel look like for us? Did you hear my question?
Oh, well, yeah, yes. Ideally, of course, our objective really is, it still is, and will remain to be, to flatten the curve. No? So it's not as if our mind is set on the vaccine, diba? Or the availability of the vaccine. The vaccine is somewhat of a medium to long-term solution. But between now until getting that vaccine, the target is still to flatten the curve. And I think we've been successful in areas, in local government units, where we, the national government and the local government units, have been quite successful in maintaining the numbers, in driving down the numbers, and keeping the numbers low. So much so that they're under MGCQ, no, nasa MGCQ sila, and economic activities have begun to, flow. Not flourish, but at least flow. Right? We've got areas like NCR and neighboring provinces wherein we're not there yet, and we're focusing our efforts here in these areas. No? And we've had success stories to inspire us, like what happened in Cebu City, particularly when people thought, oh no, run away na sa Cebu City, but we were able to, manage it well and on time. So the timely management, we were able to avert a crisis there. So that's an inspiration. If we can duplicate Cebu City in Metro Manila, that would be what we want to be able to do. But remember, Cebu City is small in scale compared to NCR. NCR is 16 Cebu cities together, or 17 Cebu cities together, na integrated, na tied up together like that. So you'll need 17 success stories ng Cebu City to get a grasp and a grip on NCR, plus its neighboring provinces pa. So it's a challenge, and it's something that is not only solely the responsibility of government, but everybody, the entire nation, the entire society, private sector included. So we want to be able to manage it so that we can get the economic activities to start flowing as well. So when we say new normal, ganun talaga ang mangyayari. It's really a new normal of doing things, but there are also a lot of opportunities, that come out. So siguro, what we hope to be able to see and accomplish right now is, despite the pandemic, that we see a silver lining and we see where we are weak at and try to convert weaknesses into strengths, maybe accelerate some industries that medyo naging dormant, like science and technology, information communications technology, online, the online economy, the digital economy. These are opportunities na, has remained dormant, and COVID has forced us to really look at these industries and try to accelerate its growth. So a lot of adjustments have to be made under this new normal. And right now, in this fight, in this part of the fight with COVID-19, it's just really a balancing act. If before we were just focused on health, right now it's balancing health and economy. People have got to start living their lives safely. People have got to start working again, and we have to get the economy back on its feet. So look for those opportunities, look for areas of growth wherever you can, and let's help each other in propelling their growth, sustaining its growth, and get our country back on its feet together.
Perfect. That's actually a nice. It sounds like even a nice end to today's webinar. Parang closing remarks. It's a nice anyway. So that is the end of this edition of SCMAP Live. So we would like to thank our speakers, of course, Cabinet Secretary Karlo Nograles, Dr. Beverly Ho, and Secretary Karl Chua. Unfortunately, Mayor Magalang was supposed to join, but he got tied up. Special thanks to CabSec Karlo Nograles, because he made this possible and helped us to really build this webinar and to share a wealth of information to the industry and also to our countrymen. So for our participants on Zoom, an online feedback form will open on your browser once you leave the webinar. We would appreciate your thoughts so we can mount better events for you. Finally, you can keep up to date with what we are doing here at SCMAP by visiting our website at scmap.org and by following us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. On behalf of everyone here at SCMAP, I am Pierre Karlo Nograles. Thank you once again for joining us, and we hope to see you in October for our hashtag SCC20 Live, our supply chain conference for this year. Thank you again for attending, and we would love to see you again soon in our next event. And thank you again to our speakers, especially CabSec Nograles.